At just 18 years old, she was found dead in a beach house, her body surrounded by a cocktail of drugs that shocked the coroner. But the real tragedy wasn't just how she died. It was the secrets she was forced to keep while the world was watching. Today, we uncover the heartbreaking truth of the girl who never got to grow up. To understand the end, we have to look at the beginning. Born in 1958 in West Lafayette, Indiana, Mary Anissa Jones was thrust into the spotlight at age 8. When her family moved to California, her mother, Mary, was determined to see her daughter succeed where others had failed. The pressure was immediate. Within months, Anissa landed the role of Buffy Patterson-Davis on the hit sitcom Family Affair. The show was a massive success, but for Anissa, it was a full-time job that stripped away her identity. She was marketed as a permanent toddler. This is where the psychological damage began. Even as she hit puberty and her body naturally began to change, producers were horrified. They didn't want a growing girl. They wanted the brand. They forced her to bind her chest with tight bandages to hide her developing figure. They dressed her in baby doll dresses long after she should have been wearing teenage clothes. And, most famously, she was never allowed to be seen without the Mrs. Beasley doll. She was a teenager trapped in a child's costume, a living brand for a network that viewed her as an asset rather than a human being. The internal struggle was immense. Anissa would often look in the mirror and see a stranger. She was Buffy to the mailman, Buffy to her teachers, and Buffy to the millions of fans who sent her letters. Her own name, Anissa, was becoming a distant memory. This lack of identity is a common thread in the tragic stories of child stars, but for Anissa, it was compounded by a fractured home life. While she played part of a perfect TV family with Uncle Bill and Mr. French, her real parents were locked in a bitter, toxic divorce. She became a legal pawn, caught between a mother who pushed her career and a father she desperately missed. By the time Family Affair was cancelled in 1971, the damage was done. Anissa was 13 years old and had never known a day of normalcy. She thought the end of the show meant the end of the character, but Hollywood had other plans. She tried to pivot to film, famously auditioning for the lead role of Regan MacNeil in The Exorcist. Director William Friedkin admitted she was talented, but he turned her down because he feared the audience would only see Buffy being possessed by a demon. This rejection was a turning point. It signaled to Anissa that she was permanently stained by her childhood fame. She felt she had no future outside of a character she had grown to loathe. Her rebellion was swift and severe. By age 15, the girl the world thought was an angel was spiraling out of control. She dropped out of high school, unable to cope with the bullying and the constant Buffy taunts from classmates. She turned to the streets of Oceanside, California, seeking out a crowd that didn't watch primetime television. She began shoplifting, not because she needed the money, but because she was desperate to feel something, to exert some kind of control over a life that had been scripted since she was 8. She spent time in juvenile detention, a shocking fall from grace for America's sweetheart. On her 18th birthday, March 11th, 1976, the final nail was driven into the coffin. Anissa received a payout of roughly $180,000 from her trust fund. In today's economy, that is nearly $1 million. To a girl struggling with deep-seated trauma, a loss of identity, and an escalating addiction, this wasn't a gift, it was a death sentence. She finally had the freedom she always wanted, but she had no foundation to stand on. She moved into a small apartment, bought a car, and began spending her fortune on the only thing that made the pain go away: drugs. The events of August 28, 1976, remain etched in the dark history of Hollywood. Anissa was staying at a friend's beach house in Oceanside. The party had been going on for hours. To the other teenagers there, she was just another girl, but Anissa was carrying a weight none of them could understand. She wasn't just partying, she was seeking a permanent escape. The next morning, a friend tried to wake her and found her cold. When the paramedics arrived, they found her body surrounded by a pharmacy of blue and red capsules. The coroner's report was one of the most harrowing ever recorded for a celebrity. Anissa had a lethal cocktail of seconal, cocaine, PCP, and methaqualone in her system. The coroner stated it was one of the highest concentrations of drugs he had ever seen in a victim. Her body had literally shut down under the weight of the chemicals. But the investigation that followed revealed an even darker secret. Dr. Moshos was a physician who had become a doctor to the stars, or more accurately, a glorified drug dealer with a medical license. It was discovered that he had been illegally prescribing massive amounts of seconal, a powerful sedative, to Anissa. He was eventually charged with 11 counts of illegally prescribing controlled substances. The tragedy of Anissa Jones wasn't just a troubled teen story, it was a story of systemic failure. She was a vulnerable young woman who was exploited by a doctor who saw her as an easy target. Sadly, Moshos died before he could ever stand trial, taking many of his secrets to the grave and leaving Anissa's family with no true justice. The shockwaves of her death were felt across the globe. For many, it was the end of the 1960s dream. If the girl from Family Affair could die in a drug-fueled haze in a beach shack, then the perfect family was a lie. Her co-star Brian Keith, who played her uncle on the show, was reportedly shattered. He had always been protective of her on set, but he realized too late that the industry had consumed her. The loss of Anissa was the first major crack in the facade of the wholesome sitcom era. The tragedy, however, did not stop with Anissa. The Buffy curse, as the tabloids cruelly called it, seemed to follow her family. Her brother Paul, who had also struggled with the fallout of their family's broken home and the shadow of his sister's fame, died of a drug overdose just 8 years later. It was a total collapse of a family unit that had been sacrificed at the altar of Hollywood success. When we look back at Anissa Jones today, we see more than just a tragic child star. We see the blueprint for a cycle of exploitation that continues to this day. Anissa was a child who was never allowed to have a childhood. She was a teenager who was never allowed to grow up. She was used by an industry that discarded her the moment she was no longer cute or marketable. Her life was a series of bound chests, baby doll dresses, and scripted smiles, while her reality was one of loneliness, rejection, and a desperate search for a self that had been stolen from her at age 8. The real secret behind her death wasn't just the drugs. It was the profound isolation of a human being who was loved by millions of strangers but felt completely unknown. She died in a house full of people, yet she was entirely alone. There are no grand monuments to Anissa Jones in Los Angeles, but her story serves as a haunting reminder to every parent, every producer, and every fan. The children we see on our screens are not products. They are not brands. They are fragile souls who require more than just a trust fund and a fan club.